today. I had actually hoped to have one of my colleagues from Pakistan give a talk today, but he wasn't able to get his US visa, so I offered to give a talk in his place. Dr. Samad will hopefully come in the fall and talk about Gandhara and other things. So anyway, I'm glad I was able to come in and present this. Today's talk is something that I built off of an earlier talk that I gave in Mohenjo-Daro this year at a conference in January. So I was involved in a huge conference on the Indus script that was organized by the Pakistan Department of Archaeology at Mohenjo-Daro, which is an ancient site. How many of you know about the Indus Civilization? Okay, so people who don't know anything about the Indus Civilization, you'll get a little bit of introduction here, but this is one of the earliest state-level societies in the ancient world, and it's also one of those which has not been deciphered yet. So the Indus script is not deciphered. So that conference brought many scholars together to talk about the Indus script, and I learned a lot at the conference. So I made a lot of corrections to my talk and updated it, and I've been working furiously all week to get all the details. You can actually see one of my talks on YouTube now because it's been sent out everywhere. So that's why I'm hoping that we have a new video, which will be an updated talk without some of the errors. Okay. So new perspectives. First, I want to thank the Department of Archaeology and Museums Government of Pakistan for letting me work in Pakistan, and also the Archaeological Survey of India for working in India. And in Oman, I've been working on sites, so trying to Ministry of Culture there. Also, lots of colleagues who I've been collaborating with over many, many years, and funding agencies. Let's start off by saying the Indus script has not been deciphered yet. No matter what anybody says, no matter how many publications are in the library on deciphering it is not deciphered. And it will not be deciphered without the help of a bilingual text that allows us to determine the language or languages of the writing system, and a way to check the decipherment with a known writing system. So this is just to start off. I'm not going to talk about decipherment today. I'm going to talk about what new things we know about the script and how it's used. Other civilizations that are contemporaneous with the Indus include Mesopotamia, the writing system we have deciphered through bilingual text. Egypt, we've deciphered much of hieroglyphs through bilingual text. And China, we didn't have to decipher it because it was a continuous script that continued to be used from the beginning all the way to the present. So those regions we never had to decipher. In the Mediterranean, there are some scripts that we still can't read. So we can't read linear A, but linear B we can read. We can read other scripts. There are a few other small scripts from regions that we haven't been able to read, but most other texts are legible. The Indus is important because it was one of the earliest urban societies in the world where we have the use of writing as an important mechanism for integrating people. And this is something that I've been looking at for the many 40 years that I've been studying Indus. Indus cities were the first to integrate many diverse communities into large walled cities without the use of warfare. So this is Egypt used warfare, Mesopotamia used warfare, China used warfare, and no evidence of warfare in the Indus Valley. They did this integration through economic, ideological, and political processes that actually integrated a larger area than all those other civilizations, and they used writing as a part of that. So writing has a very important role in the integration process as a way to reinforce elite power and communication amongst elites, and to legitimize the ideologies that were being used by these groups. So today's talk, I'm going to talk about the origins of Indus writing, where it started from, how did they use the writing in the long process of urbanization, what role did writing play in the social, economic, and ideological processes of urbanization, and finally, why did Indus writing cease to be useful? Why did it disappear, and why isn't it used in later societies? A lot to cover in my time period, and if I talk a bit fast, I'm sorry, but I want to get it all together in one package. I'm not going to go over the details of this, but we have a chronology based on radiocarbon dates for the Indus. And early writing develops around 3500, 4000 BC, the same time period that we see it developing in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and also in China. About the same time period in all over the world, people were using graphic symbols to communicate ideas, and that began the process in all early stages. It disappears at around 1900 in the Indus. It stops being used. So this is a big period of time, and then for 900 years after that, people continued with Indus type technologies, but they did not use writing. So this is a specific choice made by people who are in power that we are not going to use this writing. We're going to use other mechanisms for integration, but not writing. So in terms of origins, the script, I argue, can be defined as emerging from early potter's marks that are found on pottery and in graffiti. This is post-firing writing on pottery. We have it on seals and ceilings during what we call the early Harappan period. This is a time period when we see lots of communities settling down and developing agriculture and different technologies and small villages and towns all over the Indus Valley and in adjacent regions in Oman, Iran, Central Asia. We have graffiti at Tepeyaya and Shari Sokta and Mundigat. These are in Afghanistan. People have done analysis of that graffiti. None of the early graffiti from those areas has any link to Indus writing. So I'm not going to go into it today, but I just want to let you know it doesn't link to Indus writing. So whatever was happening on the Iranian plateau and in Balochistan did not contribute to the writing system that we have in Indus. All these other purple dots are important sites that I'll be covering today, where we have evidence for early graffiti and pottery that early scholars, some of them did not pay a whole lot of attention to, but I am going to show that they're important. And as we study them more closely, we can see that all of those sites contributed to the eventual use of writing in the Indus Valley. So that's going to be the kind of summary that I'm just kind of presenting you what I'm going to show you in the next several slides. At Harappa, we have two phases, which I call the Ravi phase and the Diji phase, which shows the emergence of writing in this region, which if you measure longitudinally and by the cross, it's about 1,000 kilometers north-south and 900 kilometers east-west. So a very big valley of people interacting over a long distance. So writing didn't start in one spot. It started over a broad area through convergence of people interacting in different regions. So the earliest scholars who started to try to identify writing, this is in the 50s and the 30s and for the 50s when they began excavating and collecting sites in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Jean-Marie Casal, who was a French archaeologist, excavated a site called Amri in the Indus Plain. Walter Fairservice from Vassar College surveyed in Balochistan. He found lots of pottery with marks on it, and they argued that these marks might have something to do with writing. But they didn't have enough of them, and they weren't excavated in good enough context that they could build a database to show how they linked. So they had ideas that they might link, but they weren't sure. Some archaeologists didn't even bother with that writing on pottery. They illustrated one out of thousands that they found. They just said, oh, we found lots of graffiti, but here's only one sherd with that graffiti, so I have no idea what we found. So the site of Diji is a site that I'm hoping to get back to and re-excavate to get more samples. So one sherd from the site of Diji has been illustrated with one piece of writing. Other scholars, such as B.B. Lal, a very famous archaeologist in India, excavated a site called Kalibangan and presented pottery with this sign on it. This sign, just kind of fast forward, is the most important sign of the Indus writing system. It's found in more contexts, it's found more commonly, it's found at the beginnings of words, the middle of the word, and the end of the word. It is the most important sign of the Indus writing system. He found it on pottery, which he said are from the lower levels of Kalibangan, but he didn't say which level. So I don't know where the sherds are from, and I don't know exactly which level they're from. They could be from the early Harappan layer, which is what I thought he meant, or they could be from the Harappan layers, which should make sense too. But this sign, according to Parpola, Mahadevan is the most leading scholar from South India who made a concordance. He took every single sign of the Indus script that he could find, and he made a concordance, and he gave them all numbers. And lots of other scholars have given numbers to all these signs, and I'm using Mahadevan's number. Number 342 is the key number for this sign. So I'm going to use his number throughout. Parpola, who's a Finnish scholar, has gone through and he said that that sign has lots of variations, and he gives it all the way to X I think W, X, yeah. So A, B, C, D, all the way to X, numbers of variation for the same sign. They could be different signs. They could be earlier or later, we don't know. But he calls all of these signs the same, which I don't agree with. But anyway, this sign is important, and people know that it's important because we've studied all the script from later on. And I'm going to focus on this sign because this sign to me demonstrates the widespread use of a common ideology and symbolism in the Indus Valley. And it also continues on and is the most important sign in the Indus writing system to help us understand the development of writing over time. So the site of Mehrgarh is famous because it is one of the oldest sites in South Asia and Pakistan, dating to about 7,000 BC, and we have early communities developing agriculture there, and eventually they started making pottery, and when they made pottery, they started putting marks on their pots. And part of this is to identify whose pot is what when you go into a kiln, but some of it was done after firing to identify what's in the pot. And they began using a lot of different marks on their pottery. This is a very well excavated site by the French team, and Gonzague Kibron, who's one of their archaeologists, did an extensive study of all the pottery marks from Mehrgarh. And he concluded that none of them, some of them had some similarity to later Indus writing, but he said none of them really contributed to the writing system. So he kind of thought that these were not really important and we couldn't see them continuing in the writing system. But I argue that many of these signs did come into the writing system, even though potter's marks continue to be used alongside of writing. So you can develop a way of graphic symbolism that starts before writing, continue it on all the way through. Writing develops, but those writing traditions still continue. So you have two types of things going on with the same sign. Today, dhobis in India, people who wash your clothes, put a little mark on your clothes, identify whose clothes they're. Cattle brands are made in India and Pakistan that are symbols. They're not writing, but they're symbols, and they continue even though people have formal writing systems. So that's an example of potter's marks versus writing. So they continue, but they also sometimes contribute. If you look at other sites, there are sites in the northern Indus Valley in the area of Haryana, which have lots of pottery with symbols on them, which indicate that some of these symbols are geometric designs that we can associate with mandala. Mandala is a cosmogram that shows how the earth is organized. And mandalas have important ideological components, but they can also be part of writing. So all of these mandalas that we see on pottery could be linked to writing, but they could also be linked to specific belief systems and specific rituals relating to a specific deity. So ideology and writing are clearly linked together in this use. Some of these continue on into the Indus writing system. Many of the symbols found on Kunal graffiti do not continue in the Harappan script repertoire. So they're like the potter's marks from Mehrgarh. They were made, they were symbols, they were used, but they did not become part of the Indus writing system. But 36 of the signs from Kunal have been identified by the excavator, and Kunal is a site that has been well excavated in terms of keeping track of all the potsherds that have writing on them. 36 of those signs can be linked, if you have some imagination in some of them, to Indus writing. And so the archaeologists who study this, Khatri and Acharya, argue that these signs reflect a contribution of early potter's marks to Indus script. One of those signs, even though it's not complete, is sign 342. So that's found in the corpus of material from Kunal, so keep that in mind. We see also the use of multiple signs together, sometimes two signs together, and sometimes three signs together. And when you have two or three signs together, we assume that people are combining symbols to create new concepts or new words or new forms of communication. So if you just find one sign, it's hard to say this is writing. But when you find two signs together in different forms or repeatedly, and three signs together, then we argue that these symbols are now being used to communicate more than just concept and ideology, but a series of monosyllabic sounds. So it may refer to I own this, or this is for those people, or this belongs to such and such. So something very short. It's not writing a dissertation, it's just communicating. So finding in Kunal 2 signs together, or 3 signs together, of the signs that go into the Indus writing system, people argue that this represents writing. And it's the beginnings of the Indus River. At the site of Rahmanderi, which is in northern Pakistan, the excavator in the 1980s, he excavated this very important site, found thousands of potsherds, and unfortunately, for his dissertation, he just made this one figure that says, all of these signs are found in the pottery, and these ones are the ones that match with the Indus. So I don't know how many sherds he found, and I don't know what the sherds look like, but amongst that group, he says that that sign is also found, 342. So I can only believe what he said, and unfortunately he's passed away. All that pottery is in a big storeroom and shower, and we haven't been able to get access to it. So I'm trying to get access to it so we can restudy that material. Rahmanderi is also important because on that site, in that site we have early seals which have geometric designs on them that are also mandalas. There are symbols that are cosmograms. And some of those seals have animal motifs on them with graphic symbols embedded amongst the animals. So here's one, there's another, and there's another. So these are simple shapes that could be identified with a form of writing. They're not writing sentences, they're putting a symbol that reflects a concept or an idea that identifies this as an important ideological object. So these are some of the examples of the sites that have evidence for early writing. And in my introduction, I say that there are sites in Gujarat which probably also contributed, but unfortunately, the people who have excavated this material have not been paying attention to it and did not publish all those graffiti. They're starting to look at it now. This is the site of Rahmanderi pottery, and this is the pottery from a site called Mundipipri in Gujarat, which has identical pottery, and I'm sure they had lots of graffiti on it. But nobody bothered to report the graffiti. So I'm trying to get my colleagues who are responsible for this pottery to go back and look at it very carefully to identify all the graffiti so we can study it. And they said they will, but it just wasn't a priority when they were publishing their first report. Another site is Jalilpur and also Diji itself. Probably the most important site for trying to find graffiti is the site of Mohenjo-Daro, which is the biggest city of the Indus Civilization in Sindh. But most of the levels that date to this early time period are beneath the water table today. The water level in that part of Sindh is getting higher. So the entire site is buried underwater. I mean, there's a lot of it that's underwater, so we can't dig there. But I'm hoping that we will find ways to excavate under that level and collect pottery, because I expect to find it at Mohenjo-Daro too. We know that that site has early Harappan pottery, so this would be very important. I'm going to end this kind of preliminary survey with Balakot. So Balakot was the first site that I excavated in 1974-75 when I was a student with George Dales working in Pakistan. And Dr. Meadow excavated the early Harappan layers, and he collected all the pottery for this period and began to document it. I helped draw a lot of it and was able to see some of these early graffiti. And these early publications by Dales identify that sign again. So this sign is present on graffiti on the pottery from the Balakotian levels, the pre-urban phase levels at Balakot, which is a coastal site in the southern part of Pakistan. We never finished analyzing all the pottery before we started working at Mohenjo-Daro. I would have Mohenjo-Daro and then Harappa. But Uta Franca, who is a German scholar, did her dissertation on the pottery of the Balakotian levels at Balakot. She went through every single potsherd in our storeroom in Karachi and identified every sherd and which level it came from, and was able to quantify all the data that we had just made a summary of. And in her dissertation, she shows that this sign starts in some early levels and continues in later levels. It continues throughout the history of the early Harappan occupation. So it didn't just start one place and used once and then disappear. It was used in multiple time periods and continued through the history of Balakot. So that's the kind of background, and then I'm coming to Harappa, because Harappa is the center of the world. Because Harappa was where I would been able to implement all the methodologies that I wish other people had done, and they couldn't do because of various constraints. But at Harappa, we were able to excavate the earliest layers, collect every potsherd, document from everything where it comes from, and then follow the sequence of development. And Harappa had connections all over this same region. So we talked about Brahmandari, which is up here. We talked about Kalibangan and Kunal, which are over here. We talked about Balakot, which is down here. We talked about Motipipli, which is around here, and Mohenjo-daro, which is here. So we talked about a whole region, and Harappa, located in the middle of the Punjab, had links to all these areas through trade. So the earliest levels of occupation at Harappa, one of the first important discoveries that we found was a fragment of a bone, what we call a button seal, and it has a hole here, and just this much of it is preserved. I think that this probably fits onto a swastika seal. So I think this is the beginning of the concept of a swastika motif. And swastika is a mandala, which shows order out of chaos. The world is divided into 4 quarters and turned in the right way, and then you have profit and benefit for everybody. So this concept of order is part of the theology of the earliest people living at Harappa. In the same levels that we found that button seal, we also found pottery, which had, the first sherd I found was just this one. It had one sign on it, so I thought graffiti, and I threw it in a bag. And later on, I was excavating more. I found the other half of the sherd. When I put the 2 together, I had 3 signs together in a complex motif, which kind of looks like a person with their hands out, or 3 stalks of grain. You can look at it in different ways. I'll show this to you again a bit later. That sign sometimes occurs by itself. We have other signs that are inscribed on the pottery. And we also have potter's marks. Potter's marks are usually made pre-fire of the pot. And we call them potter's marks because if everybody in a village is making pottery and it's all the same, it all looks the same, I'm going to mark your pot because I make my pot better than you. And when we fire all our pots together and yours always break and mine don't, we don't have an argument. That way I know that my pots survived and yours didn't, and these are my pots. Okay? They all look the same, but mine have a little mark on them. So that's why we call them potter's marks. So these pre-firing marks are done by the potter when they make the pot. The post-firing graffiti is done by whoever owns the pot. Whoever's putting stuff into the pot has nothing to do with the potter. So it definitely indicates different use of symbolism. So when we start looking at the potter's marks and the post-firing graffiti and the early Ravi phase and the Diji phase, I compile them all together, and I don't have a big sample. It's a very small area that we excavated, and that's been the main criticism that a lot of people have made towards our work at Harappa. But I'm going to show you how statistics could demonstrate that what we found is meaningful. So these are some of the signs. That's that sign from the sherd that had 3 signs together. This is a sign that shows the beginning of sign 342. Another sign, some other varieties, so not very many. And these are the pre-firing marks. They're identical to ones found in Mehergar. We have them in Mesoamerica, we have them in China, we have them in Egypt, we have them in Mesopotamia. Everybody in the world knew how to make a line on a piece of clay. So it's not something that humans couldn't do. These are not necessarily writing, but these are. In the post-firing graffiti of the Diji phase, the subsequent phase, we start getting very clear use of that sign 342, sometimes combined with other signs, and sometimes 3 signs together and 4 signs together, which I argue is right. So these data I use to argue that we have a development over time of writing system at Harappa, starting from the early Ravi phase to the Diji phase. And even in the pre-firing potter's marks, people started writing more than one symbol. They didn't just do a check or an X on their pots. They started writing entire sentences on their pots to demonstrate this is my mold, and it belongs to me and my descendants or something. So it's a very long description. If you quantify this, now you may say 23 is not a very large sample, but when you start calculating percentage, pre-firing graffiti in the Ravi phase is 30%, and post-firing is 69%. So that means that this ratio is meaningful. And because in the Diji phase, we have about the same ratio. So we have collected from the same area of the site, same amount of volume of excavation, and we see that during the Ravi phase, we have 69% of the writing is post-fire, which means they were doing a lot of writing on pottery. In the Diji phase, 78% of it was post-fire Diji. So they're doing a lot of writing on pottery. And when we get to looking at the pottery, we started finding lots of pots that have the same symbol on them, and the repeat of symbols in different parts of the site. Some of those symbols that we see on pottery also we found on a seal, which was carved, and that seal, which comes from the Diji phase, has, I would say, a link to this motif which we see in the Harappan writing. So another example of pottery to seal to then Indus script as a linkage, so possible linkage between these different types of media. During the Diji period, when we found pottery that had two signs together, I got really excited, and that's what made me really convinced that we could see the sequence of writing. Especially, we have duplicate signs together, and then this sign, there are two signs together. Even though we can only see a part of this one, I know that that's sign 342, because we have complete versions of it as well. This is a mold used for making large vessels. And somebody wrote three signs together on the clay when it was still wet to inscribe something very important on there. This wasn't just a tick mark or an X. This was so-and-so, son of so-and-so, or daughter of so-and-so who owns this vessel, or this mold. So this is going to be mine, it's my family's. And then this other sign. So another thing which is important, we had geometric seals, which were found at Ravi, and they've been found in many different parts of Balochistan. But at Harappa, we found the first, and we found these also at Harappa. They were glazed with green glaze or white glaze. But at Harappa, we found a broken seal with an elephant motif on it. The top part is missing, so I don't know if it had script or not, but I bet you it did. And we found a sealing, which is a stamp of a square seal onto clay that would have been used to close a storeroom or a container. And that has a script sign on it, and it has that same script sign, 4342. Combined with some other signs, with all you have is writing on this seal. So somebody wrote a seal with writing on it, and they stamped it into goods to indicate who owns it or what the importance of this material was. When you put all this together, you can see the beginnings of 342 in the Ravi phase, continuation during the Diji phase, the use of 342 with another sign in a certain relationship, which we see here, and that same relationship is seen in Indus writing on seals, which we found at Harappa later on. So this is a seal, so when you stamp a seal, it goes to reverse, so this is backwards. So this sign is at the end of the word, and this sign is at the beginning, because Indus writing goes from right to left. And on the seal, this is from the left to right, because when you stamp it, it's then right to left. Okay? Everyone follow? So this is confirmation that even the sequence of signs are continuing from the early Harappan into the Harappan period. So what does that sign mean? We don't know. Some people have argued that it's a container with handles. We have no pottery in the entire Indus Valley that has handles like this. Some people think it may be a horned headdress. These are horned deities found painted on pottery from Ravi, from Banawali, from Diji. And you tell me, does that look the same to you? No, I don't think it's a horned animal either. Whatever this shape is, we don't know, and I'm not going to propose any meaning for it, but whatever it is, it's important because it's found everywhere. Okay, so from Balakot, where we have a continuous sequence of its use over time, at Ramanderi, at Harappa, at Kalibangan and Kunal, all the northern sites have it, and the southern sites have it. But we remain to see if sites in Gujarat have it or not. Probably do. Probably Mohenjo-daro and Diji, all these sites have it, because this suggests that we have a shared ideology and a shared use of writing over a big area that started about, that culminated around 2800 BC, and then for 200 years this became solidified. And I have argued that we have a sequence of script development starting from the early phase, so origins in the early Harappan period, from potter's marks and graffiti, The Diji phase sees an early Indus script, including seals with writing on them. And then by the Harappa phase, we see formal writing that is used on seals spreading through all the big cities. In the late Harappan, we don't have any seals anymore. We have sometimes 1 or 2 graffiti on pottery, but writing disappears. So the question is why? We'll get to that later. The Indus civilization emerged not because one ruler emerged and conquered everybody, but because lots of cities were emerging throughout the Indus plain, developing these shared ideologies, both for cooking, types of pottery, use of script, and trade mechanisms, and then probably intermarriage amongst certain elite clans. And that this eventually results in large cities developing in core areas that were supported by their hinterland. So Rakhigarhi, Harappa, Ganveriwala, Mohenjo-daro, and Mohenjo-daro, and Dholavira are the biggest cities that controlled the Indus. And they were surrounded by smaller towns that were trading with them and interacting with them. So I would argue for multiple semi-independent states or city-states with large hinterlands. And the hinterlands of Harappa, for example, is about the size of the hinterland for early Sparta in Greece. So Sparta was a city-state. They controlled the entire Peloponnese, and that controlled about that same amount of area. Indus cities were all walled. So why do you build a wall around your city if you don't use warfare? And my argument is that it's used for controlling access into and out of settlements, for control, and also to protect the people in the settlement from bandits and people who don't follow the rules. Okay? So banditry was probably very rampant, and if you were a merchant with lots of nice goodies walking out between Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, you had 450 kilometers to go, I'm sure that you would have been robbed blind before you got there. So people would have had to be protected between the cities, but when you get to the city, you walk in a gateway, they close the gateway, you're safe. So in the Arthashastra, which is Kautilya's treatise on how to run a state, his main proposition for having a good state is having a place where people can make money and enjoy life and is beneficial to them. So the ruler is told that you have to make this place good for people to live in. That's what you have to do for a city. And this concept is not new. It started with the Harappas. So building a wall, each city had multiple walls often, and they had caravanserais outside so people who come to the city could stay in a safe place too. They had a standardized weight system. They had seals with writing. They had incredible amounts of wealth among some people. They had good transport linking the cities together by both boats and by ox carts, etc. The cities were highly organized, north, south, east, west streets. So in Indus cities, it wasn't a road from the gateway to the palace, the gateway to the temple, which is how Mesopotamian and Egyptian cities were organized. In Indus cities, every part of the city had equal access. I don't think everyone was equal in the city, but people had equal access to resources. So there were probably very wealthy neighborhoods and probably people who did not have that much wealth, and I'll explain that in a minute. We have large cities, 150 to 300 hectares, or even 400 hectares, all the way down to 1 hectare or smaller hamlets. The Indus writing has not been deciphered, but we can argue that this writing system is used for more than one language. I'll explain that later on, but also just to kind of argue that the area that the Indus writing covers is a huge area, and no single language is spoken there today, and it wasn't spoken in the past, and it's never been a monolinguistic region. So no area in the world has one language over such a big area. So the area that the Indus civilization encompassed stretches from Central Asia, where you have Sino-Tibetan or Turkic languages, to Central India, to where you have Mundari or Dravidian languages, Indo-Aryan languages, and language X, which people have identified as a Neolithic language that was the first language to get known that we use as number 342, because so far we haven't separated it out. But now, with our work at Harappa and dating these levels and finding out where seals are found, we can confirm that there are early seals with writing that only have 2 signs on them, or 3 signs on them. They were not written with long texts. And when we compile these together, there's a site called Varmana, which has the same kind of seals. They also have 2 signs, or sometimes 3 signs. Another site, Watual, has 2 signs. So when they made seals and pottery, sometimes they only put 2 signs together. So is this writing or is it not writing? I would argue that it is writing, and it's a part of a writing system that is beginning to be used to identify individuals and ancestry. At the conference in Mohenjo-Daro, Ayumu Kunosutawa, a colleague in Germany, in Japan, has been studying all the sites in India. So he's been doing a lot of research with Indian scholars. And he counted up all the different symbols found on those little seals, and he found that there's only about 71 symbols total of all those seals that have been found, and that 71 symbols were used in this early period. I think there are more than that, because if we start adding the pottery, we need to find if there's maybe more symbols on the pottery that are not on seals. So we could say that the Ravi phase has a few signs, the Diji has a few more, and by the Harappa time, we have at least 71 symbols, and maybe a bit more in the early writing system. So we see a gradual increase over time in the types of symbols being used. If you look at concordance by Mahadevan, he dumps 700 years of Harappan writing system all in one basket and then quantifies it. So he argues that there's 400 to 450 signs. Some people say there's 470 signs. So depending on how you define a sign, you come up with different numbers. And this is not an important thing to me, because with our current periodization, this list is meaningless, so as far as I'm concerned. It's just all the variations that you can have. You saw that Parpola says that there are 25 signs from the same sign, which is a lot of variation. We can argue that it's a logosyllabic, it's not an alphabetic language. Systems where a single sign can mean either a word or a syllable or a sound. Some signs look like pictographs, so this looks like a person, so is it a man or is it a woman? Is it a laborer? We don't know, but it's a pictograph. And it has probably a sound meaning as well as an ideological meaning or pictographic meaning. And some may be ideographic systems, so if you just have this symbol, it could represent an entire concept of cosmology. We know it's written from right to left because we have writing on pottery where we can see overlapping of people writing, so we can see how they wrote. On this seal, they wrote from right to left, and then they turned the seal and they wrote from right to left, and then they turned it again and wrote from right to left. And this one, they wrote from right to left, right to left, right to left, and we can tell that because of the association of certain signs with each other, and that's how people define this. This sign, this seal, they wrote what's called boustrophodon, which is as an ox plows, you turn the row, so you come here, and then around, and then under. At Harappa, I found 2 tablets, and several others too, but these are a good example, with the same text, but written in 2 different directions. So this text is meant to be read from right to left this way, and here from left to right, but it says the same thing. So early writing systems are usually pretty flexible in the sense that people can read things backwards and forwards, and you can do that too. You can read Abba, which is a group's name, back and forward, right? So there's ways to read that. Even when you see signs that are misspelled, you know what it means. The longest inscription has 26 characters, and it's found on 3 faces of a seal. So this one has this 9 or something signs on each one of these things, and so we have 3 sets of long inscriptions together. But these are the longest that have ever been found. We've never found a text that's longer. We've never found things written on monuments or in parchment. So how was the writing used? The writing, earlier scholars, when they excavated, they were trying to excavate large areas, and they didn't keep close control of context, so sometimes there's confusion about where things were found. At Harappa, we very carefully documented everything that we found and how it was located. And in our studies, we found that some houses had seals and some right next to them did not have. So it means that you could be in a neighborhood and I'm a seal user and I'm literate and I have seals, but the people next to me in a big house, they don't use them. So this is a choice that people made. Do I use writing and seals or do I not use them? We also see concentrations of seals around the gateways. Gateways are where people come into the city and out of the city, where they have to use symbols to show ownership, etc. So This is the gateway at Harappa, and the areas inside the gateway where we have a market, we found lots of seals and tablets in the debris. So higher concentrations in this area and less in the others. We find a lot of seals and tablets in eroded deposits. That's not where they were used, but where they fell because of erosion and archaeological processes. So this is a slope that eroded through monsoon rains, and things from a house on the top of the slope fell down into the street. And in that street, we found a little cache of 22 seals, or tablets, that were all inscribed with the same thing. And that nearby, we found a seal with the same writing on it. So people just didn't drop it in this rubble. It came out of a house that was up at the hill, and then it eventually got into the street. I could identify by looking at these tablets that they were written by 3 different scribes. Yeah, they were writing the same thing, but they wrote with 3 different tools, and they had different handwriting. So on this sign, which is a person carrying 2 buckets or things with this headdress, the headdress is made with 4 strokes in a certain pattern. And there's no arms. So this person was armless. This one, the arms, you can see from one side, 2 arms, clearly depicted, the same headdress, but carved slightly differently. And this one, the 2 arms were made with 1 stroke, not 2 strokes. Now, if I was writing Chinese and I had to write strokes, each stroke would mean something. So these could be 3 totally different words that mean something totally differently. Or it could just be sloppy handwriting of somebody who, I don't want to write the arms, so I'm just going to make it, and you know what I'm talking about, right? So this shows either highly refined writing or sloppiness by scribes. And this is very small. It's only 1 centimeter wide. It's very small to carve this. I was able to identify the same handwriting on one of those tablets that I showed you earlier, found in another part of the city. And this handwriting found in another tablet found in another part of the city. So that's the person who carved these was sitting in a workshop making these things. They were fired, hardened, and then used by different people in different parts of the city. Greg Jameson, one of my students, did his dissertation on studying carving techniques. And he came up with the very important conclusions that some groups were making standardized inscriptions, and we have lots of variation and intergroup variation in carving, and that there are many different carving styles, so that there will be different workshops in different cities making seals and tablets, so that there would be a high variation of this throughout the Indus civilization. He also saw that there were different ways to analyze them. You can analyze the actual shape of the animal, you can analyze the shape of the writing system, and he's been able to show that some seals found in very different sites were probably carved by the same crafters. That means a seal carved in Mohenjo-Daro ends up in Gujarat, thousands of kilometers away, or a seal carved in Haryana has ended up in Balochistan, and you can see how these things move across the landscape. At Harappa, we were able to show how seals were used in houses, where they were found in streets. Sometimes one house had many different varieties of objects. We had also in Mohenjo-Daro, one house had many different seals. So some people had lots of seals. We find evidence of copper tablets that were also important, which had writing on them. And Harappa has one kind of copper tablet, and Mohenjo-Daro has another kind. So these are copper objects of the same standardized form found in 2 different cities. And today we call those coins. So if you make metal objects with writing on them, and they're standardized in weight, and they're used for circulation within a city, it's a coin. So whether it's a New York subway token or something else, it's still a coin. And we have workshops where these things are made. I'm going to jump through this a bit quickly, I realize how late I am. And we can identify the control. These things were made in controlled workshops so that not everybody had access to them. Uta Franca went through the ancient old excavation reports to identify where different things were found. And if you look on this map, you can see green dots. Wherever there's a green dot, they found a copper tablet. This means a lot of people in this area were circulating these copper tablets at Mohenjo-Daro. And the pink dots are different kinds of seals. And you think that everybody in every single house had them. If you look at a different scale, none are found in this upper area. Okay, so this neighborhood had high intensive use of seals. Everybody had their seals, they were burying them in the floor, putting them in places. This neighborhood, hardly any seals at all. So even in the most important part of the city called DKG, we have areas that we're using and not using writing. In those areas which we think of as elite residences, there are very few seals. So these were not the merchant quarters. These were the people who may have been very powerful. They didn't have to use seals. In the last phase of the Indus cities, we see that the seals start changing. We start seeing people just using writing but no animals. We also see the use of narrative scenes becoming more important, where there's a event being depicted with writing, which I associate with rituals. And we see drinking vessels with script on them, which were probably made for special rituals. Writing was associated with ideology. We have rituals here. We see it with the swastika again, as associated with the worship of a tiger. We can see it on bangles, so people's ornaments had writing on it. So people would write your name on a little bangle. Even some gold jewelry had writing on it. So some people wanted to make sure nobody forgot that this is my pendant and it's got my name on it. And even though these were found in a jeweler's workshop where a bunch of them were there, this was people selling their jewels to be remelted in the gold. And we have one seal which has a hidden chamber that may have had writing in it on a piece of parchment or some kind of other document, cloth. So something hidden inside of a seal. The largest inscription is a huge inscription found at the site of Golavira. It's the only big public inscription, visible from the top of a gateway where people could know we are walking into this part of the city, and there's a big writing. So it wasn't secret writing, it was publicly accessible. And I'm going to skip through these few things: writing on pottery, writing on numbers. And how do we know it's used for writing multiple writing systems? Well, in the Gulf area, we have seals that have Indus writing, but the sequence are not the same as on Indus writing seals. So statistically, we can analyze the signs. This sign should be before this sign, but here they are in a different order. So it means it's writing in a different language. And just to let you know that everybody didn't want to use writing. Indus people used writing. They were trading with people in Central Asia who didn't use writing, and they intentionally didn't use writing. They had symbols of their deities, which they stamped on clay, but they never used writing. And in Oman, where I've been working, we have evidence of Indus seals stamped into pottery. And this year, we found a piece of pottery with writing on it. So this is traded to Oman. And we have Indus seals made with writing outside of the Indus Valley with Indus writing on it. So people in many different areas were producing these things. We also have possible interpretations of the writing based on Akkadian text, where this text says, "May the affair be favorable" in Akkadian. So if you're translating an Indus writing from a seal onto a Mesopotamian version, and you write it in Akkadian, it says, "May the affair be favorable." So that means all the Indus seals might just have lucky on it. So let's have a good profit. Let's have very beneficial trade. Or your name may be lucky, because I want to have a name that's lucky and I may make a lot of wealth. And these are also possibly related to deities. I'm going to skip this one. Gulf seals also have what we think might be patronymics, which means it's a writing system that may associate with Amoritic or Semitic languages, which is not the same as languages in Indus. The end of the Indus, why did it disappear? We have no writing until later on. They stopped using it. This was a choice. Nobody came from outside. Nobody destroyed the city. Nobody restructured the society. Well, society got restructured. And the disappearance of writing, I argue, is when elites who use this means of communication and trade were no longer enough. So whoever the elites were ruling the cities, something happened and changed in terms of their power capabilities that they no longer were the ones who were in charge. And writing stopped. And nobody used it again for 900 years in that region. We have the disappearance of the unicorn as well, which has happened at the same time. And when it comes to trying to interpret the writing system, we assume that it was logosyllabic, probably more than one language is represented. And the only way to be able to decipher this language system is this is the conclusion I gave at the conference in front of all the ministers, and they agreed to have more excavations. We don't have a big enough sample. So we need to get more data, and we don't have enough excavations in the Indus Valley compared to Mesopotamia and Egypt and Mesoamerica. They've got hundreds of excavations going on all the time, and they're getting lots of data to help us understand the past, but we're stuck with things that were excavated in the 50s and the 30s, and can't even look at that pottery anymore, and we need to go back and re-excavate sites. So the Minister of Culture and Sin said, okay, we're going to excavate more sites. So supposedly, we're going to start excavating new sites to try to get more data, to try to help us build our database for understanding the early writing system and possibly find a bilingual text. Thank you.